you. Thank you so much. Wow. And Jamie, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here with all of you. Didn't we, last time we were here, everybody was on the floor? Yeah. When you're on the floor, I'm on a chair, but then when you're on a chair. Thank you so much for being here. Jamie, thank you for having me back. Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you to all of you. This is a very, very, oh, do you need this from me? Hold on. Yeah, some people, we are live streaming this, so forgive me while I do a little bit of, how many of you have never heard me before? And some of you have heard me politically or heard me in other contexts, or, yeah, okay. Well, excuse me. Okay.
2004, was it? When we were in Vegas?
Yeah. Thank you.
I can do it.
Ah, yeah. When I heard Jamie, when I heard actually Rebecca play, I felt very sort of almost teary, as I'm sure many of us did. It's easy to get very romantic about America. And it's also very easy to get cynical and depressed about America. And we are living, I think, all of us, with that juxtaposition in our hearts these days. And I think it's because we love America that we are depressed. And I think how depressed it's easy to be these days is also what has reminded us that we love this country. I'm always reminded of that scene in Miss Congeniality, where at the end, Sandra Bullock says, I really do want world peace. She had been this really sort of hard-boiled CIA agent or FBI, whatever she was, and she had had her heart opened in the midst of the experience. We don't normally associate politics with an open heart. And yet, I have seen a lot in the 35-year career that I've been privileged to have. And the core of my career has been working with people who are looking deep inside themselves for answers. And particularly that has included people who are living through times of crisis. People don't usually come to me in my career because things are going well. So I often, over and over and over the years, have sat down with someone who just heard the bad news, whatever the bad news was. The test results had come back and it's cancer. Their child is addicted and it's heroin. Their spouse has said it's over. The money's gone. They're going bankrupt now. And I've had an experience in such situations over and over and over again. And that's that sometimes when people have received the worst news that they think is possible is also where they become their most noble and their most beautiful. Because right away, so many stupid, ultimately meaningless preoccupations that dominate our lives just fall away. And when the doctor says the news came back and it's cancer, you get very focused on what the doctor has to say. You get very intelligent. What exactly do the test results say? What are my chances? What are our healing options? Everybody gets very focused and very intelligent. And what I've seen over and over again is that when people are going deep inside for answers, getting real, not messing around, they know this situation is too serious. I can't play around now. I've got to look in the mirror. I've got to do everything possible to get real about my life circumstances. I've seen such breakthroughs happen. And I've seen over and over and over again. And part of this is that, hey, I've lived my own life. We all have been through these things on some level. We're a better person on the other side of it. We actually grow from those experiences. And slowly but surely, perhaps, but definitely, answers do come. And healing does happen. And breakthroughs occur. And you actually end up on the other end of that, often, a better person with an even better life. Now that experience, that career, has given me not only deep faith that when people do get real, and people are willing to look in the mirror, people are willing to do the work, people are willing to atone for the things they need to atone for, make amends where they need to make amends, get real, stop pretending, rise to the occasion, show up for the answers, show up for the healing. That has not only given me great faith that that is the way to solve problems, to get that real and to go that deep and to stop playing around. But it has also convinced me it's the only way. Because you see, a lot of times when those people come to hear me or talk to me, it's because they've already been to the lawyer. They've already been to the doctor. They've already been to the accountants. There's really kind of no place left to go except someone who is going to dwell with them in a place of greater depth. Now, our society is mitigated against that. Our popular culture mitigates against that. But it's where people live. This is what we do when we're having an argument with our spouse or one of our children, when life is really happening that's real. We get real. Americans do. We're not stupid people. Americans are intelligent people, we're decent people, we're good people. Some go to therapy, some go to AA, some go to church, some go to synagogue, some go to mosque, some go to yoga, some go to meditation, some take walks in nature. But all of us know that there's that place that's not on television. And there's that place that's not on the computer. And we're all hungry for it. We're yearning for it. That quiet place, that real place. And it's where we go and we get wiser and we can have more real conversations. And breakthroughs happen. And that's where you end up having talked to a friend and saying, oh, I'm so glad we finally talked. I'm so glad we cleared the air. And such amazing things happen when we allow ourselves to just fall into the deeper places. We're human beings. The brain has so much going on that we don't normally access. And there's so much that's available in those quiet places. You know, Blaise Pascal, French philosopher, said that every problem in the world is due to man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. We're dying for quiet. We're dying for peace. Especially these days, especially with all the social media and all the politics being the way they are, there's so much clanging, there's so much noise, there's so much craziness. It really hurts me for the children because I don't know how children are growing up around all that, not knowing just the simplicity of a walk through a garden. Now, we're going through problems now that are not just individual. We're going through problems now that are collective. And our collective behavior and our collective problem solving is called politics. That's what politics is. Politics is behavior that doesn't just represent you, but us. And in a representative democracy, theoretically, what's happening is that because we're voting for our elected representatives, they are then reflecting back to us through public policy the consciousness or the will of the people. Well, the consciousness or the will of the people is just fine in this country. We're good people. I don't think we're better than other people, but I think we're good and we're decent and basically kind people. But something has happened. I'm not saying we ever had it perfect, but right now we're living with a divergence. Here is who we are, including our capacity to go deep and go real when we have real problems. And then there's the way our government behaves. And because, although it was intended, and our Constitution says that it will reflect the consciousness of the people because we will elect them, the influence of money, particularly corporate money, huge corporate entities, that influence of that money on our governments is such that public policy does more to reflect short-term profit maximization for those corporate entities than it does to reflect our consciousness, which is our decency and our goodness. The normal average American wants to live and let live and hopes that everybody can have a fair shot and be okay, and basically has goodwill for other people. But once money got hold of our government the way it did, climaxing with the Citizens United decision, but this has been accumulating, this gap grew. And this gap is what it amounts now to a festering wound. In fact, even a life-threatening wound on our democracy. Because here we are, and here's the government that has been corrupted by a heartless economic perspective. I say heartless because it posits that the only responsibility of the corporation, whether it's a health insurance companies or a big pharmaceutical companies or a gun manufacturer, or oil and gas, or chemical or food or defense contractors, the idea is that their only responsibility is to increase short-term profits, even if that is at the expense of the worker, of the community, of the environment. Now that's unethical. That means that money comes before all else. And it's money for a very short group, a small group, which is the stockholder, when in fact everybody in America is a stakeholder in what happens in corporate America. And so politics has become about that. And there's a lot of anger about that. And it's a heartless conversation. And it's superficial, and it's narrow, and it's angry. And then here's us. Now I look at that and I go, whoa, first of all, we see how bad it is. But as someone who has worked for 35 years with people in crisis, I go, well, I know how do we get out of the crisis. We have to get real. All that a country is a group of people. That's all that a country is. And politics, the word comes from the word politeia, of the people, not of the government. This is supposed to be about the people. The government is to represent us. It's not supposed to be some drama up there and we're just spectators. But that there's a breach there. That contract has been broken. So everything that is needed to heal this country is available to us. I'm convinced of that because I've seen it over and over and over again. You get real, you look in the mirror, you recognize what you need to recognize, you face what you have to face, you get honest, brutally honest with yourself, brutally honest about the facts. You see where you have to atone for some things, where you have to make some changes, where you have to make some amends, where you have to rise to the occasion. And the way of the world is that things will begin to repair themselves. The problem is our politics doesn't allow for that. Our politics doesn't allow for that. Our politics is too narrow and too superficial a container for that level of conversation. It doesn't even recognize that level of conversation as anything other than what? It has no use for that conversation. And even the best well-intentioned people, most well-intentioned people, get sucked into that, and even if they want to, they can't break out of that. And so it's very frustrating, isn't it? Because not only do we see the problems in this country, but we see the political establishment as not a container for the genuine level of problem solving that we know is what solves problems in our lives. And I'm running for president because I know that nothing else will do it. The latest billionaire, to join the race, the latest smart guy who says we just gotta get a bunch of smart people together and we can figure this out. Money alone won't do it. Smart people figuring it out alone won't do it. What will do it is that America has to return to its heart. America has to return to its ethics. America has to return to its principles. America has to rediscover what our principles are. You know, this country has a mission statement. That mission statement is written in our Declaration of Independence. And John Adams, our second president, said that he hoped that we would revisit first principles every July 4th. Well, every time you walk into a business and they have their mission statement written up on the wall, or anytime a business has a retreat where all the staff comes together and they look at what the mission statement is, it's because in the 21st century we know you can't solve everything on the level of the external. That's not where all the solutions occur. The level of the external is the level of symptom. And if all you do is address the symptom, but you don't address the cause, and you don't address the deeper psychological and emotional dynamics that led to the problem to begin with, then any solution is going to be short-lived. It will just turn into another symptom. It will morph into another symptom, or it will simply come back. And so this is not some kind of fringe thinking. This is 21st century. We know this now. You don't just talk to the people you love and that you're really deeply involved with about things happening on the outside. We talk about how we feel. We talk about what the energy is in the room, what the energy is in the relationship. What are your thoughts? What's really going on? How many times have we said in our way, okay, let's talk about what's really going on. Let's say you and I had a problem. You say, okay, what's really going on? And we know that now. It's the 21st century. If I were to say to you, if you and I were going through a lot of stuff, and I were then to say to you, look, this is what's really going on. You wouldn't find that an odd thing to say. Now, this is 21st century. We get that. Everybody gets that now. Everybody gets that but the political establishment. Now, I'm not saying that the people in the political establishment don't get that. I'm just saying the way it as an entity operates. Now, given the fact that we have some very serious problems in our country, that's really dangerous. Not only is it very dangerous, but it is so old-fashioned. It's something left over from the 20th century. And so some of the most forward-thinking Americans don't want anything to do with it. It has led to chronic political disengagement on the part of many people who have the most to give and whose voices should be the most heard because they are voices of real power and truth. But sometimes the people who are the most interested in really going on with the 21st century and making things happen are so turned off by politics. But let's look at what happened. Because some of the most forward-thinking people turned off to politics, politics only got more toxic. And that only made the most forward-thinking people get even more turned off, which then made it even more toxic, which then made the most forward-thinking people even more turned off to the point where we got what we now have. Sometimes your car's in a skid, and we were all taught this as kids when we first learned how to drive. Take your hands off the wheel. You feel that moment? We've all had those. Well, maybe you haven't. You know, it's not a nice moment to happen. But some of us have. I've had it a couple times when you feel, oh my God, the car is going into a skid. But you know what you were taught? Just take your hands off at that moment. If you get your hands in there, then it's really going to get crazy. Take your hands off, because the way of nature, the way of physics is that it will right itself. And that's a healing principle, that nature knows how to right itself. And nature is in not only how our bodies operate, it's also how our psyches operate, and it's also in how groups of people operate. Because remember what I said, all that the groups of people, all that a nation is groups of people. So in order for us to repair, we have to remember Einstein's comment that the problems of the world will not be solved from the level of thinking we were at when we created the problem. And Gandhi said that the end is inherent in the means. In other words, we need a new kind of politics. If we want to have a different kind of result, we need a different kind of politics. And that's why I love talking in yoga studios. And that's why I love talking in churches and synagogues. It's why I love talking at universities and colleges too, because young people are very, you know, whenever I'm talking in a college or university, I'm aware these people are not 20th century people. Some of them weren't even born in the 20th century, and they shouldn't be at the effect of the very limited kind of thinking that came to dominate the 20th century. Because the 20th century mindset was all about Newtonian model and physics, and the world is a machine, and if you want to fix the world, you tweak the pieces of the machine. And that's how our political operatives work now, too. They say, okay, there's a problem. This is my new policy, and that'll fix it. This is my new policy plan, and that will fix it. Well, that's like saying medicine will fix it, which is good. And you sometimes you need to take medicine, but you also have to cultivate health. And you also have to look at what's really happening that you even got that disease to begin with. And you also have to do some additional work besides just take that particular medicine if it's a chronic illness, or else you're pretty sure that the illness will be back. And so to me, we have to look at the deeper causes of our national malaise. And that's what I want us to do. And that's what I want to help the country do. That's why I want to be president. I want to be president because I feel we need a season of repair. It's not just one issue here and one policy that's going to fix it. There's not just one policy, one incremental approach that's going to fix it. And many of those policy approaches and plans and changes I do agree with. Don't get me wrong, and I have as many policy positions as anyone else who's running. But we have to be integrative in our approach with politics, just like we're integrative with health now. You don't just not take care of your body and then when sickness comes, think that the doctor can just eradicate or suppress the symptoms. You have to cultivate health. We have to cultivate real social health in this country. We have so much societal dysfunction, even to the point of societal malfunction. But first we have to say, what is societal health? And that takes me back to our mission statement. Our mission statement is the principles in our Declaration of Independence. And right now we've lost our emotional and psychological bonding with our own mission statement. Those principles are inscribed on marble walls in government buildings in places like Washington, and they are printed on parchment, and we have it behind glass in museums. And we give them lip service, and we learn them as children. But if they're not inscribed in our hearts, they lose their moral force. And so what we as Americans, we must be whole citizens now. That's what the 21st century is, whole person approach to everything. We must be whole citizens. We must do more than just bring our minds to this. We must bring our hearts to this. We must bring our soulfulness to this, because our founding documents are very soulful. And the people who wrote them were very soulful. And the issues that they brought up were very soulful, including the terrible mistakes. The journey of America is a journey of the human soul. And when we understand it on that level, and we have a deep understanding of what is right, and also a deep understanding of what went wrong, then and only then do we know where to stand. We know what's right and what our responsibility is to extend further that which is right, and we know what's wrong and what is our responsibility as a generation to make stop right here. So first of all, I want to talk about what those principles are, and second, I want to talk a little bit about our history. First of all, 1776 is when the Declaration of Independence was signed. It was signed by some very, very brave men. And I say that they were brave because if, in fact, the British had won the war, then they would have been hanged as traitors. And with the signing of the Declaration of Independence, they laid down something extraordinarily radical. And the first thing I want to point out is that not only was it radical in 1776, it's radical today. Those principles were radical, and those principles are radical. I've heard people say about my campaign, oh, yeah, it's so great, but it's kind of radical. Yeah, feed the children. What a radical concept. Make peace instead of only preparing for war. What a radical concept. Repair the earth. I know, what a radical concept. Help people thrive. What a radical concept. That's how divergent we've become from the truth in our hearts, that love and common sense sound like this radical way to go. So let's go back and look at what those principles were and who they were and what they did right and what they got wrong. The principles that were so extraordinary were principles that repudiated centuries of an ancient monarchical and aristocratic system. And in that ancient monarchy and aristocratic system, it was deemed that only a few people would get to win. That's it right there. That's what we're really talking about here. A social system in which only a few people are entitled. Only a few people were entitled to own land, and only a few people were entitled to get an education. Only a few people were entitled to make their dreams come true on a material level. And everybody else, they were the upper classes, they were the aristocracy and the monarchy, and everybody else had no hope of improving their station. Everybody else was basically little more than a serf to the aristocracy or the monarchy. So in 1776, these men posited, as Thomas Paine said, we have it in our power to begin the world over again. And they posited this radical notion that all men are created equal, and that God gave all men the inalienable rights of life and of liberty and of the pursuit of happiness, and that governments were instituted to secure those rights. And if government's not doing its job, it is the right of the people to alter it or abolish it. All four of them huge. All four of them earth-shattering. Earth-shattering then and earth-shattering now. That's where it started. But that's also obviously where it got very gnarly. Because out of 56 of those men, there were 56 of them, 41 of them were slave owners. We've always been both. We've always been both. It's a bipolar characterological DNA in this country. We, on one hand, are founded on the most aspirational, enlightened principles of any country, and at the same time have been from the beginning. It's always been there. It's been in every generation, including ours. Forces which transgressed in even the most violent ways against the principles on which we purport to stand. That's our story. It's like when you go to therapy, you learn about your family, because then you know, well, what did my parents do and what did my grandparents do? And then you can see, okay, like where, and this is how we individuate, this is how we mature, you know? You're usually around your 20s or 30s. Okay, where did mommy and daddy get it right? Because where mom and dad got it right, I want to continue that. I want to stand on the shoulders of giants. I want to pass that on to my kids. But then you see some things in your family and you go, whoa, that we need to stop that one. That chain needs to break right here. I don't want to pass that one on to my kids. Countries mature too. And every generation writes its story. Every generation writes its chapter in an ongoing narrative. Every generation has to decide which are we going to be. And every generation contains both forces, including ours. What we're going through in America right now is not nearly as different as a lot of people seem to think. It's just the latest iteration of this American drama. So, if you look at our narrative through time, we tend to get it right. Because if you look at how Americans go through time, we tend in the direction of self-correction. So we have to identify our problems, but we want to identify with the problem solvers. So we had slavery in this country, then we also had abolition in this country. We had the suppression of women, institutionalized suppression of women. Then we also had the women's suffrage movement, the passage of the 19th Amendment, and two major waves of feminism. We had institutionalized white supremacy, segregation in the American South, but then we also had the civil rights movement. So there are many things which we have not yet corrected, some which we are in the midst of correcting, and some places where we are even sliding back. However, if as a country we have a sense of what the greater story is, what's happening here, then I believe it greatly empowers us as citizens to own the responsibility that we have. You know, we've been turned into poker chips. We're just spectators. We have to deepen inside ourselves in understanding what's really happening in order to rise up and basically stage an intervention. That's what's needed now. You know, the U.S. government didn't wake up and say, let's end slavery. With the abolitionist movement, people rose up and people stepped in. And the U.S. government also didn't wake up and say, let's give women the right to vote. That's not the way it went down. With the women's movement of the time, the women's suffragette movement, the people rose up and the people stepped in. And with the civil rights movement as well. The U.S. government did not wake up and say, we will end segregation now. That's not what happened. With Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, people rose up and people stepped in. The only thing odd about this time is that there tends to be this feeling that somehow the government that has driven us into this ditch, that those are the only people qualified to drive us out of this ditch. We're looking to the government to repair itself in ways that are naive, because the political establishment is going to perpetuate the status quo. It doesn't repair the status quo. That's what status quos do. And so we've gotten in the habit of abdicating our responsibility. It's kind of like if you have a company and you hire people to run your company, and then you only check in on them every 2 years or every 4 years. It doesn't work that way. We've allowed they're our employees, and we've allowed them to take over the company. Does that make sense? And we're just kind of looking, and we're doing what we're told. That's the extraordinary thing. We've become Stepford citizens. When I was younger, there was this book about the Stepford wives, and she just did as we were told. We're Stepford citizens. We will talk about this now. We will talk about that now. No, we will not talk about child poverty now. No, we will not talk about the military-industrial complex now. No, we will not talk about what's really happening to the earth now. We will only talk about what we are told that we will now talk about. And we will only talk about solutions within that which on some level is acceptable to the corporate donors that run Washington. Now, most of us have received a phone call or made a phone call or know about that phone call. When somebody says to somebody else, "Did you see her at the party last night?" And you go, "Yeah, I was there." "You saw she fell down the stairs, right?" "Yeah." Was anybody else there?" "Yeah, her sister was there. Her sister saw it." And then that sentence that most of us are pretty aware of now. It's America today. "Do you think we ought to do anything?" We all know what that means. It means there's a point when we know somebody who's drinking too much or taking drugs or whatever it is, and it's gone too far, and we all feel it in our gut. When I've made that phone call or received that phone call, it's always a time when everybody was starting to feel the same thing. Her sister started saying it, her boyfriend said it, her mother said it. Everybody knew it's time, it's gone too far. Does anybody know an interventionist? We all get it. And that's where America is today. We get it about drugs and alcohol because it's America today. We know how this works. And we've all learned painfully, we've seen enough to know that the survival of the physical body cannot be guaranteed if you're abusing it and abusing it. Well, we need to awaken from our magical thinking, ladies and gentlemen, because the survival of our democracy cannot be guaranteed either. And that's really big. And we really need to take that in. And the survival of our species on this planet, if we keep acting a certain way, is not guaranteed either. So I want you to know what I will do if you make me president. And you are citizens of Nevada. Anybody here not a citizen of Nevada? Okay, that means all of you carry tremendous power. The citizens of Iowa, Nevada, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, and now California to a great extent, carry the power of a decision that is deeply consequential, possibly to the entire world. And it's very profound being with you because what I feel in this room is what I feel here and in all those other states, and that is that you know that. And they're really, really good people running. And some of them I have great affection for at this point. And they're all telling you the truth. And you're doing your due diligence to listen to all of us. I think that's it's your responsibility as citizens. I'm not saying any of them aren't telling you the truth because they are telling you the truth. But what I am saying is this: it's too late to just tell the truth. We've got to go deeper than just telling the truth. We have to do what you have to do in a court of law when you raise your hand and you swear to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. You see, that's what I know. When people come to me for some kind of crisis counseling, it's like, okay, she left? Tell me what your part. Oh, Marianne, it's 90% her and 90% her, and then she met this other guy, and I'd say, I understand all that. Tell me the 10% that might have been you. And everybody really wants that. Let's just get real. Let's just get real about what's happening in America. This is what I've seen. We're grown-ups. We can do this. There's nothing happening in the United States that we can't deal with. Everything that's wrong can be made right, but not if we're going to kid ourselves and not have a real conversation about what's happening. So what I want, and why I'm here, is just so that you have an option of what I consider another way. And it's in some ways different. It's not that it's oppositional to any of the other candidates. It's just a perspective that you may or may not feel is the perspective that we should allow to dominate the next 4 years. My feeling is that we need a season of repair. My feeling is that it's like when a country is like in a car, we're in a skid, and we need to go into a very deep place and allow a healing to occur. We need to get back to the democratic and human values that make us good people, because the democratic and human values that make us good people are what make us a good country, and you can't be great if you're not good. I want to repeal that 2017 tax cut, where 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very richest individuals and corporations. I want to put back in the middle class tax cut. I want to end the corporate subsidies by which we gave $26 billion to oil and gas alone last year. I want the United States government to take back its power to negotiate with big pharmaceutical companies for lower drug prices. I want to say to the U.S. military how much you need, guys. Every dollar that you need, you should get. Every dollar you say you need in order to keep this country safe, you should get. But you know those hundreds of billions of dollars over and above that, which are not money that the military says it needs, but simply money that defense contractors want in order to increase their short-term profits, that goes away. I think we should say to the very, very wealthiest among us, the billionaires among us, we're happy for you if you made it righteously, but we would like 3% tax on your assets. Don't worry about it, ladies and gentlemen, they're not going to feel it. And then for people who have over 50 million, I think they should also come in at 2% of that. Now, what's going to happen when we do those things? We're going to have some cash on hand. And now I want to tell you what I think we should do. First of all, no society is in any way following its moral compass that is allowing the level of chronic trauma that is experienced today by millions of American children. We have 13 million hungry children. We have 100,000 homeless children. A principal here in Las Vegas at a public school told me that she has elementary school students on suicide watch. And that when she called the school district, because the school district has mental counselors that they send out to schools, that when she called the school district here to say, I need one of those mental health counselors, and I want you to realize that we have one mental health counselor in the United States for every 1,500 children in our public schools. So when she called the school district and said, you need to send me one of these counselors, I have elementary school kids here on suicide watch, this is what she was told. We can't. You're not one of the worst. When I went over to the 3 Square food pantry here, I remember being told by one of the directors that one of the problems we have, one of the fears we have, is when we give the boxes of food to kids on Friday, we don't really know if somebody else might eat their food before Monday and they come back. We have millions of American children who go to classrooms where there aren't even the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by 8, then the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. They call it the cradle to prison pipeline. We have so many American children living with PTSD. Then I was reading an article in a Chicago newspaper that it's estimated that 40% of the girls in the public school system in Chicago are experiencing a form of PTSD that is no less severe than the PTSD of a returning veteran from Afghanistan or Iraq. Now, think about this too. If you're a returning veteran, you have PTSD that's post-traumatic stress. These children, it's not post, it's present, it's triggered and re-triggered every day. This is a huge sea of unnecessary suffering. Now, what is the political establishment doing about these children? Do you hear them mentioned on any debate stage or anything like that? Why not? Why is it their despair has simply been normalized? I'll tell you why. They're not old enough to vote, so there's no constituency. And they're not old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage. So how could they possibly compete for clout with all those lobbyists, all that corporate money? $284 million last year alone was spent by big pharmaceutical companies lobbying in Washington. $125 million spent lobbying by oil and gas. This is how corrupt it is. I want a United States Department of Children and Youth. Why do we need a whole department? Because the vulnerabilities and the challenges of these millions of children, they need trauma-informed education, they need community wraparound services, they need social workers, they need mental health counseling not only for the children but for their families, they need nutritional services, they need anti-bullying, they need violence prevention, they need mindfulness in the schools. This overwhelms the capacity of something just the Department of Education to handle. This overwhelms even the agencies within Health and Human Services. I want a whole table. I want to be able to coordinate. What are the challenges? What are the vulnerabilities? Now, I want you to know something, because I don't just feel this about the children. I feel this about peace building. I feel this about the environment. I feel this about every area where we have social challenges in this country. We have the people who know what to do. America has the geniuses. We have the projects. We have the best practices. Remember, the Americans are fine. The Americans are not the problem. It's how government operates. So you meet people, and you have them here. You have them in Las Vegas. You have them in Nevada. You have them everywhere. And they're the social workers. Let's say work with these kids. And what I hear everywhere I go, when I meet the people, the early childhood educators, the school teachers, you know, it's not just our kids who are traumatized, our teachers are traumatized. It's not just kids who go to school every day hoping somebody doesn't shoot me today. What? So do the teachers. What we are doing, the damage that is being done to a swath of humanity, where do you think these kids are going to be in 20 years, everybody? You know, no person should live only for ourselves, and no generation should live only for ourselves either. We need a massive realignment of resources in the direction of America's children. Because when I meet people, as I do all over the country, who do the kind of work that needs to be done for these kids, I ask them, how many of the kids that you serve and that you feel you're able to help that need it, how many, what's the percentage that you feel you're able to give the help that's necessary? And it's eerie, actually, because I hear the same number all over the country, 10 to 15%. Now, it's interesting also. How do they get funded? Well, there are usually a few government programs, and there's a lot of NGO, nonprofit work. We all know, we've been part of it. Oh, they raised $50,000. They raised $100,000. I was in New Hampshire the other day, and the sexual violence and the battering of women is so great, the governor has appropriated additional resources. You know what they mean when they say additional resources? Compare what they mean when they say additional resources to the millions and even billions that they are giving to the forces, the multinational corporate forces that are so sucking up all the national wealth in this country as to make inevitable all of this societal pain and dysfunction. And that's what's happened in the last 40 years. There has been a massive transfer of wealth into the hands of 1% of our population. 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. This whole trickle-down economic theory that everybody embraced in the 1980s, oh, it's going to be so great. Just make the corporation have to worry about short-term profits for its stockholders. That'll be just great. They don't have to worry about those pesky regulations. They don't have to, like, safety and health. They shouldn't have to worry about the worker. They shouldn't have to worry about the environment. They shouldn't have to worry about the community. But it'll be great, see, because they'll make so much money, and then all that money will trickle down because they'll create jobs, and that will lift all boats. It's been 40 years. It didn't lift all boats. It left millions and millions of people without a life vest. It has created the largest income inequality since 1929, and this is where all this suffering comes from. And this will not be repaired with an incremental approach here or a policy plan there. That's not what's going to fix it. What's going to fix it is we're going to wake up and get how egregious this is and have a season of repair with a fundamental break. If you elect me, expect a fundamental pattern disruption of the economic and social and political principles that prevail. Not chaos. We don't need chaos, but we need change. And the only way you can have this kind of change that is not chaotic is when enough people understand what it is that needs to be done. We also need a World War II level mass mobilization to repair the climate, to reverse the climate. and to repair the earth. We're in la-la land here. Ladies and gentlemen, if we do not act quite radically within the next 12 years, we could have within 15 or 20 years, we could have a level of mass social collapse like we've never seen in the modern era. We're in Las Vegas. You've been reading articles about the heat. I don't need to tell anybody in Las Vegas that this stuff's here, this stuff's coming. And if we do not take care of this and get busy, we could have whole swaths of countries, whole swaths of continents even, that are uninhabitable because of the heat. And if the land is uninhabitable because of the heat, that means the food can't be grown there. That means massive food shortages. That means economic collapse. That means people leaving because they can't live there. They can't eat there. There's nothing for them to eat. They can't eat there. That's called an environmental refugee. We already have 63 million displaced persons on this planet, the largest humanitarian refugee crisis since World War II. You think it's bad now? What's going to happen? What will happen if in places such as Africa or other places, people just get massively on boats to try to find some place to be? This is why we have to act, and we have to act now. We have to sequester the carbon, we have to reforest, we have to develop clean energy sources. A lot of that's happening here in Nevada, I know. We have to get on with it. We have to get on with it. We have to make this happen. We have to replace the power grids, and we're going to need help from a lot of the industries that have done industrial scale harm. We have to enroll them to do industrial scale repair, and we can do this. We also have to deal with the animal factory farms. Not only are they immoral, the cruelty that they represent, but also, if we don't take care of the animal factory farms and stop that runoff, and what we're going to have is, no matter what even if we did everything else, we would still be destroying ourselves because of the nitrous oxide and the methane. We need a world-class environmental scientist at the head of the EPA. We need to have a mass mobilization to deal with this. And the point is, we can. We're Americans. We were hardwired for big things. We are a big thing. We were born of a big thing. It's these small things that aren't who we are. We're not created to do small things. We were created to do big things. America doesn't do small well. America does big well. And that's what we need. But we need a president who is not afraid to say, we're going to do a big thing. We're going to do this. We're going to do it over the next 7, 12 years. We're going to make it happen because we can. Because right now, it's almost like a doctor not telling you the truth. I mean, do you expect the doctor to not tell you? It's really, you got stage 3. We got to do this, 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 and you decide what we're going to do. But our political system doesn't want to upset you, because then it might come across negative, it might scare you. We're treated like children, and it has infantilized us all. The next thing we need to deal with is our national security agenda, which is equally insane. We spend $760 billion a year on our military. As I said before, you know, my father was in World War II. Today is Veterans Day. I was at Veterans Village, this very, very inspiring place here in Las Vegas. I think we all, I do, and I'm sure we all do, have great respect for the U.S. military. What I'm doing now is this is not a criticism of the military. This is a criticism of the political decisions, not the military decisions, by which we spend $760 billion on the military, $40 billion on the State Department. Then within the State Department, I want you to remember when I tell you all this is your money. Take this personally. This is your money. This is what your tax dollars are going for. So you've got $760 billion that you are spending on the military every year. Let's be really clear. We're talking every year. And then the State Department, which is diplomacy and mediation and development, so that you might cultivate peace, that gets $40 billion. And then within the $40 billion, there is the USAID, that's $17 billion, and that's for long-term development and humanitarian assistance. And then in addition to that, also within the $40 billion, are called the peace-building agencies, and they get less than $1 billion. And the peace builders carry out the projects, which statistically mean there will be greater peace and there will be a lesser incidence of conflict. You don't just take medicine, you cultivate health. Health is the absence of sickness. Sickness is not the absence of sickness is the absence of health. Health is not the absence of sickness. We have an integrative approach to healing the body, and we now need an integrative politics and an integrative approach to healing the body politic. We need the equivalence of the health and wellness space in issues of war and peace. We need to declare peace. We can't just be endlessly prepared for war. I look at the military like a good surgeon. Does America need the best surgeon? Actually, yes. Nobody would say, yes, we do. But the sane person tries to avoid surgery if possible. Do we need the best on hand? Oh, yeah, we need the best on hand. But you don't just rely on surgery. You cultivate health. And that's why I want a Department of Peace. I want a peace academy, just like we have a military academy. I want people who practice the peace-building skills. And I want the Department of Peace to have a domestic component as well as an international component. A lot of the skills are the same, but a lot of the skills are different. If you're doing restorative justice and conflict resolution in the Congo, it's similar but different than if you're doing restorative justice and conflict resolution in Chicago or Los Angeles. But it's a lot of the same stuff. Expanding educational opportunities for children, economic opportunities for women, reduction of violence against women, amelioration of unnecessary human suffering. That's where violence comes from. You put large groups of desperate people together, societal dysfunction is almost inevitable. We should see large groups of desperate people, whether in a corner of an American city or in another corner of the world, as a national security risk. Desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. So humanitarian assistance is not just some bleeding heart liberal thing, it's preventative medicine. And then the last major pillar, and then I'll stop and I'll take whatever questions and comments and we'll discuss whatever you wish. The last pillar for me of a moral politics has to do with the principle that you cannot have the future you want if you're not willing to clean up the past. I want America to repair itself. I want to end one aberrational chapter of American history and begin a new one. So, like I said, we got to get real. And all we are is a bunch of people. If you go to an AA meeting, you got to admit your character defects. Got to take a fearless moral inventory. If you're Catholic, you go to confession. If you're Jewish, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, is the Day of Atonement. Get real, admit what you did, and clean it up. And racism was our original character defect. And I do not believe that the average American is a racist. That is not my experience, and it is not my belief. But it is my belief that the average American is woefully undereducated about the history of race in the United States. And what I have seen over and over again in some of the whitest places you could be is that when people do hear just some facts that maybe they haven't heard since the 7th grade or they never were taught, and they see the whole timeline, I have met so many people going, oh, well, now that you put it that way. So let's just go over this a little bit. And black people in the room, this is nothing new to you, but oddly enough, you might be surprised how new it is to some people. First slave ships were brought over here in 1619, and slavery was not abolished till 1865. That's just short of 250 years. At the end of that time, historians believe that there were between 4 and 5 million formerly enslaved people. General Tecumseh Sherman promised every former slave family of 4 the proverbial 40 acres and a mule. Now, we've all heard that phrase, but allow yourself to feel with the fullness of yourself what that means. You've been a slave. Your grandparents were slaves. Their parents were slaves. Their parents were slaves. And now you're told it's over. Where are you supposed to go? What are you supposed to do? And that's why that 40 acres and a mule would have meant everything. It means you will have acreage. One thing these people had were skill sets. It was forced labor. But they would know what to do with this. Now, the U.S. government sent federal troops to the South, stationed them there for 12 years at the end of the Civil War to ensure that slavery would not be reinstituted. The tragedy, much of the tragedy of the things I'm talking to you about, are you okay, honey? Okay. Things would have been different, I believe, if Abraham Lincoln had lived. Now, the the federal troops were there for 12 years. And during that time, it's amazing. I mean, during the time that those 12 years of Reconstruction, there were black senators, there were black congresspeople. We really had a little window that showed what could have been. Once the federal troops left, all that was over. White legislatures throughout the South passed what were called the Black Code laws to ensure subpar economic, social, and political opportunity for black people. So what followed? We all know about the lynchings. What do you call that if it's not domestic terror? What do you call the Ku Klux Klan? Domestic terror. So what you've got is not only 250 years of slavery, but that was then followed by, except for those 12 years, another 100 years of institutionalized violence against black people. 100 years after the end of the Civil War, 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, which dismantled segregation. The next year, the Voting Rights Act, which gave equal opportunity access to the polls. Even that's been chipped away at since 2013, which is why we now have voting suppression efforts all over the country. And in many ways, we know that we've slid backwards. We've slid backwards with mass incarceration, slid backwards with racial disparity in criminal sentencing. We've slid backwards with mandatory minimums. The economic gap between blacks and whites at the end of the Civil War, the understandable gap, simply has never been closed. And also, I think a lot of white Americans might not realize how many times there have been efforts at the accumulation of black wealth and the actual accumulation of black wealth, black Wall Streets, et cetera, that then state and local governments have purposely thwarted. Germany has paid $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations since World War II. This doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen. Obviously, money alone can't solve all of this, and it can't change history. But those reparations have gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. It's time for us to do this. My plan that I've submitted is for $500 billion to be dispersed over a period of 20 years. And the money would be dispersed to a reparations council of black leaders, themselves descendants of enslaved persons, from a broad array: academia, culture, business, religion, politics. And the stipulation on the part of the US government would be that the money is to be used for purposes of economic and educational renewal. Within that, it should not be white America's decision how it's spent, whether it's historical black colleges, capital for black businesses, issues that have to do with gentrification. If I owe you money, I don't get to tell you how to spend it. So the stipulation of economic and educational renewal, and other than that, this is black America's business, according to its own leadership, what is then done. I also would remind you that this is an economic stimulus. This is an economic stimulus. You know, it's been established that black families were to manifest as much wealth as white families. And you know the gap. You have a black person with the same educational achievement as a white person, and statistically the black person still makes less money. If that gap were closed, our economy would be $1.5 trillion larger. So this is a stimulus. You know, it's like when Martin Luther King used to say that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Well, doing right by anybody anywhere does right by everybody everywhere. And that's what we need. We need to know that this is a time when small random acts of kindness is not enough. We need huge strategized acts of doing the right thing. We need a season of repair. We need to politicize that which is good and true and conscience-filled. That's what reparations does. That's what rescuing these children does. That's what having a Department of Peace does. That's what mass mobilization to reverse climate change does. That's what a repair of the profound dynamics of economic injustice do. To turn this ship around, really to turn this ship around, I believe, we've got a 20-year job on our hands to really get this country back aligned with the angels of our better nature. and get this country back on democratic track. But as I said to you at the beginning this evening, we're not the first generation to have to deal with some serious assaults to everything that this country is supposed to be about. Let's just not be the first generation to wimp out on doing what it takes to get this country back on track. There are a lot more lovers than haters here, but the haters are political right now. And they're very serious, and they're organized, and they're effective. And we have to be as serious about our love and as committed to our love and as convicted behind our love as some are behind their hate. If we were as individuals saw a hungry child in here, there's no way we would not feed that child. The love that will save the world is not just love for our own children, it's love for the children on the other side of town and the children on the other side of the world. This is who we are. We are good people. We cannot be great if we're not good. That's my agenda. That's how I feel, and I'll answer any questions you have. So I'm running for president because this is an option. It's up to you. And that's